Some stories find you when you least expect them. This one came to me from an old journal, passed down through a family who never forgot what happened in Copper Bend, Arizona, in the autumn of 1882. It is a story about choices, the kind that define a man, and the kind that a town would rather forget. I share it now because I believe we need reminding that courage does not always look like what we expect. Sometimes it looks like a dusty stranger with nothing but a wagon and a mule, stepping forward when everyone else stepped back. If you have ever felt invisible, overlooked, or written off by folks who should have known better, this story is for you. It is also for anyone who believes that family is not just blood, it is a choice, made fresh every single day. The flies found the water trough before anyone thought to offer the woman a drink. Silas West noticed that first, not the crowd gathering in the town square, not the murmuring voices that carried on the hot wind. The flies, fat and lazy, circling the murky water while four people stood on the courthouse steps with their throats dry as the dust caking his boots. He had not planned to stop in Copper Bend. 8 years was long enough to forget a place, or so he had told himself every mile since leaving. But Job, his mule, had thrown a shoe 2 miles back, and a man could not cross the Sonoran Flats on a lame animal. So here he stood, sweat running down his back, the smell of horse manure and sour beer from the saloon mixing with the dust that hung in the still air. The woman on the steps did not look down. That was the second thing he noticed. 3 children clustered around her, a boy of maybe 10, with his jaw set hard, a girl half that age clutching her mother's skirt, and a little one too young to understand why everyone was staring. The woman's hand rested on the smallest child's shoulder, not gripping, just there, steady. "And so we come to the matter of distribution," a voice carried over the crowd. Silas knew that voice. His stomach tightened like a fist closing. Mayor Herschel Todd stood behind a table dragged out from the courthouse. A ledger opened before him, a piece of chalk in his hand. He had grown heavier since Silas last saw him, the vest straining at its buttons. Same smile, though. Same way of talking, like he was doing folks a favor while he picked their pockets. "Now, I know times are hard for everyone," Todd continued, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. "But Christian charity calls us to provide for the widow and the fatherless. Mrs. Holloway here lost her husband in the mine collapse 6 months back. As most of you know, she is—" He paused, lowered his voice like he was sharing shameful news. "She is deaf, has been since childhood, cannot hear a word we say." Someone in the crowd laughed, a short, ugly sound. Silas's hands curled at his sides. He could smell the crowd now, sweat and tobacco, and something sour underneath. The smell of people working themselves up to do something they knew was wrong. "The children are healthy enough," Todd went on. "The eldest boy is strong, good for farm work. The question before us today is simple. Who among us will take responsibility? The boy on the steps. Tommy, someone called him, had his hands balled into fists. His mother touched his shoulder. The fists stayed clenched. But the boy stopped moving forward, and the woman just kept looking out at that crowd with eyes that saw everything. even if she could not hear a single word they said about her. As Silas pushed forward, he did not know why. His boots moved before his mind caught up, carrying him through the bodies that smelled of Sunday sweat and cheap cologne, toward the front of the crowd where he could see her face clearly. She was not begging. She was not crying. She was waiting to see if anyone in this whole town had a shred of decency left. If this story has found you today, I would be glad to hear where you are watching from. Drop a comment below. Sometimes the smallest connections remind us we are not walking this road alone. The chalk scraped against the blackboard like fingernails on slate. Silas watched Todd write a name, Thomas Holloway, in large, crooked letters. Then draw a line beside it, waiting for someone to claim the boy like a stray dog at auction. Flies droned around the platform. One landed on the little girl's cheek. She did not brush it away. "Strong back on this one," Todd said, tapping the chalk against the board. 10 years old. Old enough to earn his keep. A farmer near the front stepped closer. Silas recognized the type sun-cracked face, hands that had never been gentle with anything, the smell of cattle and old sweat rising off him in the afternoon heat. "I'll take the boy. What about the rest?" "We're getting to that." "Mr. Drucker," Todd turned to the crowd. "The girl is 7, Lily. Quiet disposition. Any households need help with younger children. Mending, kitchen work." No hands went up. The youngest is 4. Samuel. Now, I know a boy that age is more work than help, but surely someone, a woman near Silas, muttered to her neighbor. 3 mouths to feed, and the mother can't even hear you call for supper. Who'd want that burden? The words hung in the thick air, like the smell of something rotting. On the platform, the little girl Lily had started to cry. No sound came out, just tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. Her small shoulders shaking, Mrs. Holloway knelt, her back to the crowd, blocking her daughter from their stares. She wiped the child's face with the hem of her worn dress. Her hands moved quick and sure signs. Silas realized she was speaking to her daughter in a language the crowd could not hear and would not understand. The boy, Tommy, stood rigid beside them. Silas could see the cord standing out in his neck, could almost hear his teeth grinding together. "Perhaps," someone called out from behind Silas, "it would be easier to place them separately. 3 different homes, less strain on any one family." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Heads nodded. The tension in people's shoulders eased, like they had found a solution that let them sleep at night. Mrs. Holloway's head turned. She could not hear the words, but she had seen the nodding, the relieved faces. Her hand found her son's shoulder. This time, she held on tight. Silas felt his boots moving before his mind made the decision. Silas reached the table. His boots stopped inches from the splintered wood. The smell of Todd's pomade hit him first, sweet and cloying. Mixing with the sour tang of nervous sweat, the mayor's smile had frozen somewhere between welcome and warning. I said, "Can I help you? You know me." A flicker crossed Todd's face. Recognition. Then something else. Something that looked like a door slamming shut. "Silas West." Todd said the name like it tasted of vinegar. "Thought you left these parts years ago." "I did." "Then what brings you back to Copper Bend?" Silas did not answer. He was looking at the woman on the steps. She had turned toward him now, her dark eyes moving across his face the way a person reads a letter they have been waiting for, taking in every line, every shadow. He reached into his coat. The leather coin purse was old, cracked along the seams where Martha had stitched it the winter before they married. 12 years he had carried it. 12 years of cattle drives and mended fences, and work for men who never bothered to learn his name. He upended it onto the table. Coins clattered against the wood. Silver and copper, spinning and rolling before settling into silence. Not much. Everything he had. Todd stared at the pile. What is this? I'm taking her. Silas kept his voice flat, quiet. The crowd had gone still behind him, and all three of her children. The silence stretched tight as a hangman's rope. Then someone laughed. A man near the back, nervous and too loud. Others joined the sound, ragged, uncertain, looking for permission to find this funny. You? Drucker stepped forward, his weathered face twisted. You don't even have a homestead. Were you going to keep them? In a tent. I have a wagon. A wagon? And Todd shook his head, that pitying smile spreading across his face. Mr. West, I don't think you understand. This arrangement requires more than you offered my wife. The laughter died like a candle blown out. Todd's face went pale, then red. His mouth opened, closed, worked without sound. Silas leaned forward, close enough to smell the coffee on Todd's breath, the pomade going rancid in the heat. 8 years ago, I rode to this town asking for help. My wife was sick. My daughter was dying. You told me there wasn't a wagon to spare, wasn't a doctor who could come, wasn't anyone who could do a single thing. His voice stayed low. That was the dangerous part, the quietness of it. Write my name in that ledger, or I will write it myself. Todd's hand trembled as he picked up the pen. The nib scratched against paper, loud as a scream in the silence. Silas turned. Mrs. Holloway Grace. They had called her, stood on the steps with her children pressed close. The boy Tommy had unclenched his fists, but had not relaxed. Lily had stopped crying, her face still wet. Samuel sucked his thumb, watching with eyes too big for his small face. Silas extended his hand, palm up, not reaching, not grabbing, just offering. Grace looked at his hand, then at his face, then at the crowd that had spent the last hour treating her like livestock. She stepped down from the platform. Her hand did not touch his, but she walked beside him, her children following, and together they moved through the bodies that parted without a word. The wagon waited at the end of the street. Job stood in a patch of shade, ears flicking forward as they approached. Silas helped the children into the back. Lily first, then Samuel, then Tommy, who hesitated before taking the offered hand. Grace climbed onto the bench seat without help. As the wagon rolled past the last building, she touched his arm. Her fingers pressed once, then lifted. She held up a small slate, chalk marks, fresh and white. Why? The fire crackled and spat, sending sparks twisting up into the dark. Silas fed another mesquite branch into the flames. The wood was dry. good for burning, but quick to ash. He would need to gather more come morning. 15 miles behind them, Copper Bend had disappeared into the dust. 15 miles of silence, broken only by Job's hooves on the hard-packed trail and the creak of wagon wheels. The children sat on the far side of the fire, three small shapes huddled together on the quilt their mother had spread over the hard ground. They had not spoken since leaving town. Not to him. Anyway, the girl Lily whispered something to her brother, and Tommy shook his head without looking up. Grace knelt beside the wagon, unpacking a cast-iron pan blackened from years of cooking. She moved with the quickness of someone used to making do with little. No wasted motion, no hesitation. The smell of salt pork began to rise from the pan, mixing with the wood smoke. Then beans, sputtering in the rendered fat. Silas's stomach tightened. He could not remember when he had last eaten. "What are you after, Mr.?" Tommy's voice cut through the fire snap. The boy had risen to his feet, hands clenched at his sides, chin lifted like he was ready for a fight. Silas did not look up from the kindling. "Hand me that water bucket. I asked you a question, and I asked you for the bucket." Tommy did not move. The firelight caught the tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders had drawn up toward his ears. A boy trying to be a man because someone had to be. Silas kept his voice flat. "Or don't. Suit yourself." The silence stretched. A log shifted, sending another shower of sparks into the night. Somewhere out in the darkness, a coyote let loose a long howl, high and lonesome, and another answered from the ridge, closer. Then Tommy crossed to where the bucket sat beside the wagon wheel. He picked it up, carried it back, and set it down next to Silas. Not gently, water sloshed over the rim, cold on Silas's hand. The boy sat back down, farther from the fire this time, but he sat. Grace had watched the whole exchange. Now she returned to her cooking, stirring the beans so they would not stick and burn on the bottom. The smell of them rose thick and rich. And Silas saw the younger children lift their heads like hungry animals catching a scent. He wondered when they had last eaten something hot. The meal passed in near silence. Grace portioned out the beans and the hard biscuits she had brought from town, giving the largest shares to her children. She took almost nothing for herself, a few bites. Scraped from the edge of the pan, Silas noticed. He said nothing. Afterward, the little one, Samuel, began to droop. His head nodded forward, jerked back up, nodded again. On the third time, he slumped sideways against Silas's bedroll, his small body curling into the rough wool like a kitten seeking warmth. Grace moved toward him, hands reaching to lift him away. Silas shook his head. "Once, let him be." She paused, studied his face in the flickering light, the shadows playing across his features. Then she settled back on her heels, something in her shoulders loosening by a fraction. The older children fell asleep soon after. Lily pressed against her brother's side, Tommy with his back to a wagon wheel, face turned away from the fire. But Silas could tell from his breathing that the boy was not truly asleep, just pretending, keeping watch. Grace remained awake. She pulled out her slate and the worn stub of chalk, wrote something in careful letters, held it up for Silas to see. "You did not answer." He took the slate. The chalk was nearly gone, barely enough left to grip between his fingers. He thought for a long moment, the fire popping and hissing beside him. Then he wrote in letters smaller than hers, nobody else stepping up. She read it, wiped the slate clean with her sleeve. Wrote again, that is not why. Silas almost smiled. He spoke instead, slowly and clearly, so she could read his lips in the unsteady light. Best I got. Grace watched his mouth form each word. Then she wrote once more, the chalk scratching soft against the slate. You lost someone. Not a question. A statement of fact. Plain as the stars overhead. The fire popped. An ember landed near his boot, glowing orange against the dark earth. He did not brush it away. He nodded. Grace held his gaze for a long moment. The firelight caught something in her eyes, recognition. Maybe understanding. Then she wiped the slate clean and tucked it back into her apron. She did not write anything else, did not push for names or stories or explanations he was not ready to give. She simply looked at him, one person who knew what it was to be left behind, recognizing another, then turned to check on her sleeping children. Silas stared into the flames until they burned down to coals, the heat pressing against his face while the cold crept up his back, somewhere in the darkness beyond the firelight. The coyotes had gone quiet, but another sound reached him now, faint but growing, carried on the night wind from the direction of the hills. Hoofbeats, more than one horse, coming closer. The riders had been cattle drivers, pushing a small herd toward the rail station 2 valleys over. They passed the camp without stopping, their lanterns bobbing in the darkness like fireflies before fading into the hills. Silas had not slept after that. He sat with his back against the wagon wheel until the sky turned gray, then pink, then the pale gold of early morning. 3 days they traveled, 3 days of dust and creaking wheels and the slow rhythm of Job's hooves on hard-packed trail. On the 3rd morning, they made camp beside a creek that ran cold from the mountains. The water moved fast over smooth stones, catching the early light. Silas could smell it clean and sharp, with that mineral tang of snowmelt even in autumn. He cut 2 willow branches, stripped them clean with his knife, found line and hooks in the box beneath the wagon seat. Tommy watched from a distance, arms crossed over his chest. "You know how to fish?" Silas asked without looking up. "No, Oh, come here then." Tommy did not move. Silas shrugged. He walked to the creek's edge, waded in up to his ankles. The cold bit through his boots, numbing his feet almost instantly. He cast his line into the deeper water where the current slowed. Footsteps crunched on the gravel bank. Then Tommy was beside him, still holding himself stiff. But there, Silas handed him the second pole. "Watch the water, not the line. Why, fish will tell you where they are. Ripples, shadows, movement that don't match the current." They stood in silence. The creek rushed past their legs, and somewhere upstream, a bird called out high, sharp, lonely. "Where'd you learn?" Tommy asked. "Everywhere. Any place got water, got fish. You've been alone long." Silas felt the question land somewhere deep. Long enough. More silence. The boy's line drifted with the current, the makeshift float bobbing gently, Reckon I'm used to it too, Tommy said. His voice had gone quiet. Being alone, Silas looked at him then, at the thin shoulders, the jaw set hard against showing anything soft. You got your mama? Got your brother and sister? That ain't what I mean. I know what you mean. Silas turned back to the water. But you're wrong. Tommy's mouth opened, closed. He did not argue. He did not walk away either. The sun climbed higher, warming the rocks along the bank. Grace sat near the wagon with Samuel in her lap, braiding Lily's hair while the girl drew in the dirt with a stick. Then Tommy's line went taut. The boy's eyes went wide. His grip tightened on the willow pole, knuckles turning white. Easy, Silas said. Don't yank. Let him run a little, then pull steady. Tommy's arms trembled with the effort of holding back. The line cut bright trails through the water, zigzagging, diving deep. Now, pull! Tommy pulled. The fish broke the surface, a trout, silver and speckled, maybe 2 pounds, thrashing against the morning air. Water sprayed across Tommy's face. The smell of it, river water and fish and wet stone, rose sharp and clean. The corner of Tommy's mouth lifted, just for a heartbeat. Then he caught himself, looked away, pressed his lips back flat, but the curve remained. Barely, just enough. That afternoon, Lily brought Silas a piece of paper torn from her mother's recipe book. On it, she had drawn 5 figures standing beside a wagon. The smallest one held the hand of the tallest, who wore an enormous hat. That's you, Lily said. Mr. Mule. Mr. Mule. 'Cause you talked to him. The mule. I seen you. Silas looked at the drawing, at the careful pencil lines, the stick arms and round heads, at the way she had put them all together, like they belonged in the same picture. He folded it careful and tucked it into his shirt pocket. Before supper, Tommy taught him 5 signs: water finger spread, tapping the chin, food, fingertips to the mouth, stop, thank you, safe. The boy's hands moved quick, impatient, but he repeated each one until Silas got it right. Grace watched from the fire. When Silas signed thank you to her clumsy, the motion too slow, something shifted in her face. The hard line of her mouth softened. That night, she wrote on her slate, "Where are we going?" Silas took the chalk. The stub was almost gone now, barely enough to grip. He wrote, "A place that needs building." Grace read it, then wrote beneath, "So do we." She wiped the slate and put it away. But before she turned toward the children, she touched his arm. Brief, light, here, seen. They broke camp at dawn. The trail wound upward now, into hills thick with juniper, the air smelling of sage and something else, rain coming. Maybe, or just the memory of it. By midday, they crested the final ridge. Below them, tucked into a valley of tall grass and wild roses, stood the bones of a cabin, half a roof, no door, a stone chimney reaching cracked and crooked toward the sky, and behind it, almost hidden by the overgrowth, 2 small wooden crosses. The grass came up to Samuel's chest. He ran through it with his arms spread wide, the golden stalks parting around him. Lily chased after, and the sound that rose from her high and bright and startled was laughter. The first Silas had heard from either of them. Tommy stood beside the wagon, surveying the ruined cabin with narrowed eyes. "This is it. This is it. Ain't got a roof. Half a roof." The boy looked at him. Something flickered across his face, not quite respect, but close. "You gonna fix it. We're gonna fix it." Silas climbed down from the seat, his knees protesting after 3 days on the trail. "You know how to swing a hammer?" "No." "Then you'll learn." He walked toward the cabin. The door frame still stood, though the door itself had rotted off its hinges years ago and lay half buried in the tall grass. The stone chimney remained solid. Martha had mixed that mortar herself, hauling sand from the creek bed in buckets while he cut timber. He could still see her there if he let himself. The way she wiped her forehead with her sleeve, the way she smiled when the work was hard. He did not let himself inside. The floor was covered with leaves and animal droppings. A bird had built a nest in the exposed rafters, and the smell of dust and old wood and something faintly sweet mouse droppings maybe filled the single room, but the walls held true. The foundation stones had not shifted. It could be a home again. Grace appeared in the doorway. The light fell through the gaps in the roof, catching the dust motes that swirled around her. She walked the perimeter, her hand trailing along the rough-hewn logs, testing the joints, the corners, the places where the wind would find its way through. She stopped at the cold hearth, ran her fingers across the stones. Then she turned to face him, pulling out her slate. "You built this for them." Silas nodded. She erased the words, wrote again. "Now build it for us." Outside, Samuel had collapsed in the tall grass, still giggling at the clouds drifting overhead. Lily sat beside him, weaving stems into a crooked circle, a crown. Maybe, or nothing at all. Tommy emerged from the small shed behind the cabin, his arms full of rusted tools, a hammer with a loose head, a saw with a cracked handle, a box of nails gone orange with age. He dropped them at Silas's feet, did not wait to be asked what came next. "We start with the roof," Silas said, "before the weather turns." Tommy picked up the saw without a word. The afternoon passed in labor. Silas showed the boy how to measure timber, how to cut along the grain, how to set a nail without bending it. Tommy's first swings were wild, the hammer glancing off the nailhead, but he did not quit. Just wiped the sweat from his face and tried again. Grace worked beside them, clearing debris from the cabin floor, hauling water from the well in a wooden bucket she had found beneath the collapsed porch. The well still held water. Silas tasted it to be sure, cold and clean, with that mineral sweetness of deep earth. By evening, they had cleared the inside and patched 2 sections of roof with salvaged boards. Silas built a fire in the old stone hearth. The smoke rose clean and found its way out through the gap where the rest of the roof should have been. After supper, Grace walked behind the cabin. Silas knew where she was going. He had watched her notice the crosses earlier, the way her eyes had found them and held, the way she had chosen not to ask. He stayed by the fire, giving her space, but through the gap in the wall where a window would someday be. He could see her standing before the 2 small markers. Wild roses had grown up around the graves. Martha had planted them the spring before Eliza was born. Said every home needed something beautiful that came back year after year. The smell of them drifted to him now, sweet and faint, almost lost beneath the wood smoke. But there, Grace knelt in the roses, her head bowed, Her hand reached out and touched the weathered wood of the nearest cross, where the carved letters had nearly disappeared beneath 8 years of wind and rain. She stayed there a long time. When she returned, her eyes were dry. She took out her slate, the chalk stub barely enough to hold between her fingers. Their names. Silas's throat tightened. He had not spoken those names aloud since the day he dug the graves, had not allowed himself to shape the syllables, to give the grief that much room in his mouth. But Grace was waiting, patient, not pushing. He swallowed. The sound was loud in the quiet. Martha. His voice came out rough, scraped raw. He had to stop, swallow again. And Eliza, my wife, my daughter. Grace watched his lips form each name. Then she nodded, slow and deliberate. She did not offer comfort, did not reach for him with words he could not hear anyway. She simply wrote one more line and held it up. They would want this to be a home again. Silas stared at the words until they blurred. That night, after the children had fallen asleep inside the half-roofed cabin, he sat alone by the dying fire. The stars wheeled overhead. Bright and cold and indifferent, he heard footsteps. Grace sat down beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her shoulder near his. She did not write anything, did not ask anything, just sat with him in the darkness while the smell of wild roses drifted from behind the cabin and the last embers faded to ash. Somewhere in the hills, thunder rumbled. The air had gone thick, heavy with the promise of rain. The sky turned black in the time it took to drive a nail. Silas looked up from the roof beam. The clouds had piled behind the western ridge without warning, a wall of darkness rolling toward the valley like something alive and hungry. "Get down!" he shouted to Tommy. "Now!" The wind hit before they reached the ladder. It tore through the valley with a sound like canvas ripping, bending the tall grass flat, sending loose boards spinning from the unfinished roof. Silas dropped the last 6 feet. His boots hit mud. The first drops had already turned the packed earth to slick clay. His feet went out from under him. He landed hard on his back. The breath knocked out of his lungs, cold wet, soaking through his shirt and into his spine. Tommy landed beside him, scrambled upright. Then his boots slipped, and he went face first into the muck. When he pushed himself up, brown water dripped from his chin, his hair plastered to his skull, mud in his eyes, in his mouth. He spat and gagged. Lightning split the sky white. The thunder came a heartbeat later, so loud Silas felt it in his teeth. Samuel screamed. The boy was near the well, frozen in place, his small body rigid. Lily crouched beside him, arms wrapped around her brother, her own face the color of old bone. Grace was already running. She could not hear the thunder, could not hear her son's cries. But she had seen his face. She reached the children and dropped to her knees in the mud, pulling both of them against her chest. The force of it pushed her sideways. Her hand sank into the muck up to the wrist. Silas tried to stand. His boots found no purchase. He went down again, this time on his hands and knees. The cold mud squeezing between his fingers, the smell of it, wet earth and rotting leaves, and something sour filling his nose and throat. He crawled. The rain came harder. driving horizontal, stinging his face like thrown gravel. He could barely see, could barely breathe. The world had shrunk to mud and water and the desperate need to reach the wagon. Tommy, his voice was lost in the wind. "Help me!" The boy appeared at his side, still dripping mud, teeth clenched against the cold. Together they fought their way to the wagon. Silas grabbed the nearest rope and hauled himself up, his boots sliding on the wet wood. The canvas cover was whipping loose, snapping like a wounded thing. They pulled it tight, tied it down. Silas dropped back into the mud and crawled toward Grace. She was trying to stand, but Samuel had wrapped himself around her leg, refusing to let go. The mud sucked at her skirts, pulling her down. She went to one knee, then both. The other arm still clutching Lily. Silas reached them, lifted Samuel. The boy screamed louder, thrashing, but Silas held him firm against his chest, felt the small heart hammering through both their clothes. "I got you," he said. "I got you." He reached down for Grace. She took his hand, her grip slick with mud, fingers cold as creek water, and he pulled her upright. For a moment, she leaned into him, her weight against his shoulder. Then she steadied herself, and they fought their way to the wagon. Tommy had already climbed inside. He reached down for Lily, hauled her up over the tailgate. Silas handed Samuel up next, then helped Grace, then swung himself over the edge and collapsed on the wet floorboards. The canvas billowed and cracked above them. Rain hammered against it, finding every gap, dripping through in cold rivulets. But they were out of the worst. Samuel buried his face in Grace's neck, his whole body shaking. She could not hear his sobs, but she felt each one, the tremors passing from his small chest into hers. She rocked him, her mud-caked hands moving in slow circles across his back. Lily pressed against Tommy's side. The boy did not push her away. His arm came up, awkward, and settled around her shoulders. Lightning flashed again. Samuel shrieked. "I'm scared," he wailed. "I'm scared! Quit crying!" Tommy said. His voice cracked on the words. Silas shook his head. "Let him cry. Being scared is natural. Crying's how you get through." Tommy looked at him. In the dim light, his face was hard to read, mud-streaked, exhausted, but something else underneath. Something younger than he usually allowed. "You ain't scared." Silas pulled off his coat, the old army issue, soaked through but warmer than nothing, and draped it over Grace's shoulders, over Samuel still trembling against her. "Scared plenty," he said. "Just too old and too tired to have the energy for crying." The corner of Tommy's mouth twitched. He did not fight it this time. The storm raged another hour. Silas told a story to pass the time, something about a rabbit who outsmarted a coyote, made up piece by piece, the details coming slow. Grace watched his lips, translating into signs for Samuel, who gradually stopped shaking. When the rain finally eased, they sat in silence. 5 people pressed close in the cramped wagon, clothes soaked, hair dripping, covered head to foot in mud. Lily's voice came small and uncertain. "Can we stay here forever?" Silas looked at Grace. She was watching him, waiting. She nodded, slowly, deliberately. And outside, through the thinning rain, Silas heard hoofbeats coming up the trail toward the cabin. The rider was Drucker, Silas recognized the weathered face before the man had fully emerged from the tree line. The farmer who had wanted Tommy for fence work sat hunched in his saddle, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, his horse's flanks heaving from the hard ride up the mountain. Silas climbed out of the wagon. His boots sank into the mud. "What do you want?" Drucker did not dismount. He sat there, looking at the half-built cabin, at the wagon with its torn canvas, at Silas standing in the muck with nothing in his hands. "Todd sent me." The words came slow, reluctant. "Wanted to make sure you hadn't run off with his property." "They ain't property." Drucker's jaw worked. His eyes moved past Silas to where Grace had appeared at the wagon's edge. The children clustered behind her. His gaze lingered on Tommy. "Strong boy," he said. "Could still use help with my fences." "He ain't for sale?" "Everything's for sale. West, you know that well as I do." Well, Silas did not move, did not speak. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and bruised grass. Something shifted in Drucker's face. The hard lines around his mouth loosened, then tightened again, like a man fighting with himself. "I had a boy once." His voice had gone rough. "Fever took him. Same summer it took your girl." The words hung between them. "Town didn't help me neither." Drucker looked down at his hands on the reins. "Said they couldn't spare the medicine. Said there wasn't enough to go around." He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a burlap sack, dark with rain, tossed it to the ground at Silas's feet. "Nails. Good ones. And some rope. You'll need it if you want that roof finished before first snow." Silas stared at the sack, then at Drucker. "Why?" The farmer turned his horse. "Because somebody should have helped. Back then. And nobody did." He paused, not looking back. "Tell Todd I couldn't find you." Trail washed out. He rode into the darkness, and the sound of hoofbeats faded into the rain. 3 weeks later, they returned to Copper Bend. Silas had wanted to go alone. Grace had other ideas. "They need to see us," she wrote on her slate. "All of us. Together." So they came down from the hills in the wagon. Job plodding steady on the rutted road. The children wore their cleanest clothes, which meant their only clothes, without fresh patches. The town watched them come. Silas felt the eyes on him as they passed the livery, the saloon, the courthouse where Grace had stood on the auction block. Whispers followed them down the main street like flies following a carcass. Grace walked beside the wagon, her back straight as a fence post, Samuel's hand in her left, Lily's in her right. Tommy walked ahead, shoulders squared, looking straight forward. The boy had grown in 3 weeks. Not taller, just bigger somehow. They stopped at the general store. The smell hit Silas when he opened the door, pickle brine from the barrel by the counter, roasted coffee beans in burlap sacks, the sharp tang of kerosene, leather from the saddles hanging on the back wall, the smell of a town that had everything while his family had nothing. The shopkeeper, a thin man named Garrett, looked up from his ledger. His face went through several expressions before settling on careful blankness. "Mr. West, Mrs. Holloway, we need supplies," Silas said. "Flour, salt, coffee, and boots for the boy." Garrett glanced at Tommy, then back at Silas. You have money, got credit. Drucker's vouching for me. Surprise flickered across the shopkeeper's face. Drucker, ask him yourself. The door opened behind them. The bell chimed. Small and bright, Mayor Todd stepped inside. He had lost weight since the auction. His vest hung loose, the circles under his eyes darker than before. He stood in the doorway, blocking the light, staring at the family he had tried to scatter like seeds in a hard wind. West, his voice was flat. Heard you were still around. Heard right? That arrangement, it's working out. Silas turned to face him full. Ain't an arrangement. It's a family. Todd's lips pressed thin. Family. You know, that's not how things what? How you auction folks off like cattle. That how things are done. The mayor's face went red. His mouth opened, closed, opened again with nothing coming out. Through the window, Silas could see people gathering outside, men and women who had stood silent at the auction, who had looked away when Grace needed them. The door opened again. An old woman pushed through Widow Agnes, white hair escaping from beneath a faded bonnet, her eyes bright and wet. She walked past Todd without a glance and wrapped her thin arms around Grace. I'm sorry, she said. Her voice cracked on the words. I should have spoken up. Should have done something. Grace pulled back. She looked at the old woman's face, read the grief written there, the shame. Then she took out her slate and wrote in careful letters. You gave us bread the night before. I remember. Agnes's hand went to her mouth. She pressed a worn Bible into Grace's hands. Leather cover, cracked. Pages soft with age and use. It was my mother's. I want you to have it. Grace held the book against her chest. Todd still stood in the doorway. The crowd outside had grown. Faces Silas recognized from the auction, faces that had laughed, faces that had offered to take children from their mother. One by one, they looked down, unable to meet his eyes, unable to meet Grace's steady gaze. Silas turned back to Garrett. The boots. For my boy? The shopkeeper nodded slowly. He pulled a pair from the shelf. Good leather, sturdy soles, the kind that would last through a hard winter and beyond. Tommy took them with both hands, stared at them like he had never seen anything so fine in all his life. Then he looked up at Silas, did not say thank you, did not need to, just nodded. Once, outside, as they loaded the supplies into the wagon, Grace touched Silas's arm. She held up her slate. Home now. The cabin had a roof now. A real one. Shingled tight against the weather. Not a gap to be found. Silas stood in the doorway, watching the last light of autumn fade over the hills. The air smelled of wood smoke from the hearth and the apple butter Grace had been cooking since morning, sweet and thick, with that sharp edge of fruit just starting to turn. Behind him, the fire crackled in the stone chimney. The sound was different now that the roof was complete, contained, warm. The shadows it threw moved across walls that held no gaps, no holes where the wind could find its way through. Lily's drawings covered the space beside the window. Dozens of them, pinned with nails Drucker had brought. The edges curling in the heat, stick figures and horses and mountains, One showed 5 people holding hands beneath a crooked sun. Tommy's map hung near the door. He had drawn it himself, the creek where they fished, the ridge where the wild berries grew, the trail down to town. Home territory, marked out in a boy's careful hand. The table was set for supper. 5 places, 5 tin plates, 5 cups filled with water from the well. Grace moved between the hearth and the table, carrying a pot of stew that steamed in the cooling air. Rabbit that Tommy had caught in his snare. Vegetables from the small garden she had started in the cleared ground beside the cabin. The smell of it, rich and savory, with wild onion and sage, filled the room. She had sewn curtains for the windows, simple calico, faded from some previous life, but they softened the cabin in a way Silas had not expected. Made it look like someone lived here, like someone meant to stay. The children sat at the table. Lily traced patterns on the worn wood with her finger. Tommy sat straight-backed, watching the food with poorly hidden hunger. Samuel kicked his feet against his chair legs, the rhythm steady and impatient. "Pa," Samuel said. "Can we eat now?" The word landed like a stone in still water. Silas did not move. His hand rested on the doorframe, knuckles going white against the wood. Grace had stopped beside the table. She was watching him, her dark eyes steady, waiting. Tommy looked down at his plate. Lily looked at her mother. The fire popped and hissed in the silence. "Pa," Samuel's voice wobbled. "Did I say something wrong?" Silas crossed the room. His boots were loud on the floorboards. He had laid himself each plank, cut and fitted and sanded smooth over long autumn days. He sat down in his chair, picked up the ladle, filled Samuel's plate first, then Lily's, then Tommy's. "No," he said. His voice came out rough, scrape-thin. "You didn't say nothing wrong." Samuel grinned, gap-toothed, unreserved, crinkling his whole face. "Good. I'm hungry." "You're always hungry," Tommy muttered. But the corner of his mouth had turned up. Grace served herself last and sat down across from Silas. She bowed her head, lips moving in silent prayer. The children followed. Even Tommy, who usually fidgeted through Grace, stayed still. When she looked up, her eyes found his across the table. Something in her face had softened, opened, like a door left ajar. They ate. The stew was good, simple food. The kind that filled you up and left you warm. The kind Martha used to make on autumn nights when the first frost was coming and the world outside turned cold and hard. After supper, the children helped clear the table. Lily washed the dishes in a basin by the fire. Tommy dried them with a flour sack towel. Samuel tried to help, but mostly splashed water on the floor. And nobody minded. Silas stepped outside. The evening had turned cool. The first real chill of autumn settling into the valley. Stars were coming out, scattered across the darkening sky. Somewhere down by the creek, a bullfrog called out, low and steady. He walked around the cabin to the 2 small graves. The crosses had been repaired, fresh wood now, cut clean, the names carved deep where the weather could not erase them. Martha West, Eliza West. Wild roses still grew around the markers. The last blooms of the season had faded to brown at the edges, but the smell of them lingered faint and sweet beneath the wood smoke drifting from the chimney. Silas knelt in the grass, pulled a few weeds from around the base of the nearest cross. "Got a family now," he said. His voice was low, meant for no one but the dead and himself. 3 children, a woman, good folks, the kind you would have liked. The wind stirred the roses. A petal fell, catching on his sleeve. I ain't trying to replace you. Never could. He stopped, swallowed against the tightness in his throat. But I reckon maybe you'd want me to keep going. Build something, not just wait around to follow you. He touched the cross that bore his daughter's name. The wood was smooth under his fingers. Her name is Lily. She draws pictures, reminds me of you sometimes. The way she sees things nobody else notices. He stayed until the stars came out full and bright. Then he stood, brushed the dirt from his knees, and walked back to the cabin. Grace was sitting on the porch. The chair was one he had built, rough work, but sturdy enough to hold. She had a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the chill. Silas sat down beside her. The lamp glowed through the window behind them, casting a warm rectangle across the boards. Inside, the children had gone to bed. He could hear Samuel's faint snoring through the glass. Grace took out her slate, wrote slowly, the chalk scratching soft in the quiet. My husband gave me his name. Will you give me yours? Silas read the words. Read them again. He took the chalk from her hand, thought about what to write, set the chalk down instead. He spoke slowly, shaping each word so she could see it on his lips. I was hoping you'd give me yours. Something moved across Grace's face. Not quite a smile, but close, real. She took his hand. Her fingers were rough from work, lye soap, and garden dirt, and all the labor of making a life from nothing. Strong hands, capable hands. They sat together on the porch as the night deepened. The lamp burned on behind them. The smell of apple butter and wood smoke drifted through the cracked window. Somewhere out in the darkness, the bullfrog had gone quiet. Inside, Samuel murmured in his sleep. The bed springs creaked as someone turned over. Nobody was in any hurry to put out the light. There is something quiet that stays with us after a story like this one. Not a conclusion, not a tidy answer, just a feeling that settles somewhere deep. The way dust settles on a road after a long journey has passed. Many of us know what it is to be overlooked, to stand in a room full of people and feel invisible, to carry something heavy without anyone noticing, without anyone offering to help with the load. Some of us have been the ones standing on the auction block, waiting. Some of us, if we are honest with ourselves, have been the ones who looked away. Perhaps you have also known what it means to choose to step forward when stepping back would have been easier. To say yes when everyone else was saying no. These things do not need to be resolved. They do not need to be understood or explained or wrapped up with a bow. They are allowed to simply rest, the way a lamp is allowed to burn low at the end of a long evening, the way an old house settles into its foundation after the day is done. It is enough to have listened. It is enough to have stayed. Thank you for being here.